Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, as you join us for the launch of UNDP's new Causality Assessment for Landscape Interventions. We'll be getting underway shortly.
So then we looked at how much are we leveraging each of the signatures.
Okay, it's coming round to 3 minutes past the hour. I think we have our major group of participants joining us. So we're going to start in just a second. I'm Simon Cooper. I'm your moderator for this event from UNDP's Food and Agricultural Commodities practice. This is hosted by the Food and Agricultural Commodity Systems FACS community. And our event is going to feature the launch of the new CALI guidebook. First of all, a couple of bits of housekeeping. If you could share your names and organizations in the chat box. So you'll see Philippe has already posted something in the chat box at the bottom. And do share your names and organizations in the chat. And when we get to Q&As, we have, because we're running this as a webinar, we have the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. If I can ask you to concentrate your cues in that box, your questions, and then the panelists will answer them when we get to the appropriate point in the agenda. So we have a group of people here on the screen that you can see for whom the phrase, the wisdom of the crowd, could have been invented. So we're going to be hearing today from Andrew Bavarnik, Global Head for Food and Agricultural Commodity Systems from UNDP, part of the new Nature Hub. From Alan Fox, Deputy Director of the Independent Evaluation Office of UNDP. The main guide for the guidebook for us will be Andrea Bina, System Monitoring, Learning and Evaluation Lead for Food and Agricultural Commodity Systems at UNDP. Pemo Karen Comoso will be joining us as Principal Technical Advisor and Global Lead for Integrated Landscape Management at UNDP. And James Leslie, Technical Advisor on Ecosystems and Climate Change at UNDP Peru, will be talking to us about how this guidebook works as far as application in a particular country is concerned. That's what I'm going to be spending the next 55 minutes on. I've been, as communications specialist, the chief proofreader of this document, so I can tell you it's a really good read. So you've been sent the link already, so do have a read of it if you haven't already seen it. So let's have a look at the agenda, if we can start sharing slides there. So here we go with how we're going to run the next 55 minutes. Let's wait for that to pop up. There we are. If we go to full screen. So as I say, a panel of experts here to introduce you to what CALI is all about, and a shot there of the front of the book itself. So we'll start off with Andrew talking about why CALI. Then Pemo will take us through the complexity of landscape approaches, the main technical features of CALI, and Andrea will take us through that. And then how it works is going to be fascinating to hear from James, talking about the experience in Peru. We'll have a period for Q&A. So as we go through those first four elements of the program, do write your questions in the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. And then we'll finish off with Alan Fox summarizing what we've learned going through this hour, and indeed what we've learned in the developing of the CALI guidebook overall. So rather than delay any further, let me hand straight over to Andrew Bavarnik, Global Head of UNDP Food and Agricultural Commodity Systems, to talk about why CALI. Andrew, over to you.
Thank you, Simon. Good morning. Good day, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you for joining. Good to see we have quite a large set of participants, so that we can really start introducing you all to what I believe is a very important, powerful, new innovative tool that I believe will be extremely helpful for all of our collective landscape projects and landscape teams. Just a few words from me about the origination of this tool, and I'm glad to see that Chris Coslett, you're on the call too. Chris Coslett's a project design expert, and this idea really originated when we were trying to design, goodness me, eight years ago or something, the Good Growth partnership program, which was all about landscapes and thinking through what are the types of landscape activities that can contribute to and reduce deforestation in the landscape. And what we were really thinking about is what do project teams know and understand about the relationship between the activities that we and others design in projects and the actual results, consequences, outcomes of their activities on forests within their landscapes. And, you know, I'm sure you've all witnessed and experienced this either as advisors supporting project teams or indeed being part of a project team at a landscape level. But the dynamics of project teams is such that really there is an insufficient awareness and thinking and time and focus and analysis by, I believe, project teams on the links and relationship between their activities and consequences on how they actually are contributing in real time to forest patches, forest areas in their landscapes. You know, project teams inherit project documents. They are charged with work plans, tasked with delivering multiple activities, and very often and mostly project teams really have to spend their time focused on the deliverables, on the outputs. And there really are not tools available for empowering and allowing project teams to think above the activities and to place the activities in the landscape, in the systems in which they're operating, and explore what are the cause and effects of their activities with actual contribution to reducing deforestation in their landscapes. You know, a classic example, of course, that I always think about is when projects propose and have activities to train farmers. We train farmers, we have assumptions and theories of change that training farmers will increase yield, productivity, along with other activities will therefore lead to potentially a reduction in the expansion of agriculture into forests. But how often do we actually trace that through and actually look to see what are the consequences of the farmer trainings? Have they influenced behavior? Have they influenced farming practices? And along with other tools such as land use planning, have they really led to reduction in forest or deforestation? And, you know, quite frankly, as far as I can see, M&E monitoring systems, annual monitoring systems and data continue just to feed the generation of data around activities and outputs, and evaluations, as we know, often come in the midterm and at the end of the projects, and really don't have the resources or time to work with teams to really unpack these assumptions, unpack theories of change at the landscape level, update theories of change, and help project teams really locate themselves within these systems. And so this tool, I believe, really is a tool that project teams can use at the landscape level so that they can spend much more time and analysis to raise their understandings and their awareness about what it will take for their activities and their projects to really optimize their contribution towards the forests that they are trying to protect. It will allow them to take into account perhaps external factors that are beyond the landscape, from national policies to pricing of agricultural goods, commodities, etc. May take into account new factors that are influencing the landscape, such as immigration, and also, of course, new projects that come and old projects that go, to really allow them to consider the dynamics going on and the interrelationships and the causality between the activities that they are planning and undertaking and whether or not they are optimizing their contribution to forests and forest conservation. So I do believe that this new tool, the CALI, offers us as practitioners, as programmers, as project designers and project teams, a very new, powerful approach and methodology to complement existing monitoring and evaluation practices to really allow teams to become better equipped to connect their work to their purpose of actually leading over the years of the project to a contribution to conserve forests. So I'm very excited about this, and I certainly hope that the presentations today will be a very useful introduction to all of you, and that we are, of course, on hand to follow up, because I do hope and expect that this tool does become a mainstream tool and will be rolled out not only across UNDP projects, GEF projects, but any project that is really trying to tackle these complex issues at the landscape level. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. So that's why. And now let's hear from Pemo about the effects of CALI dealing with the complexities of the way landscapes work. Because I think one of the things I realized when reading through the guidebook was you have to take everything into account, and there are a lot of things to take into account, which old-fashioned M&E may not have covered in its complexities, as Andrew's just been explaining. So Pemo, over to you for your section, please.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you, Andrew. Indeed, landscapes, and here when we say landscapes, we are referring to many types of scapes. It could be seascape, a waterscape of any sort. These are very complex systems, socio-ecological systems, because there's a lot going on in them. Life happens in there, including humans and non-human life, all dependent on these on ecosystems and natural resources that we find in landscapes. So lots of activities happen in grasslands, for example. We find livestock being reared there. We also find wildlife conservation in some parts of the world, like Africa, tourism related to that wildlife. We find wetlands where fishing might happen, logging, settlements happen, forests happen, okay there. And so the interaction of different users, whether human or non-human, of landscapes requires us to broaden our view when we interact with these landscapes and ecosystems in them. So impact and learning the impacts of our interventions, well, through our projects, requires that iterative process of continuous learning, where we assess the effectiveness of our management interventions, if we are managing or extracting something from the landscape or using it, we are intervening in that landscape. And so we need to understand the impact of our learning. And if we're working within the boundaries of, within a landscape or an ecosystem, we may not be aware of what's happening, further from, say upstream of that landscape, for instance. But a landscape approach allows us to look beyond the boundaries of our project site, if you like, if we're referring to projects, to understand the impacts of our activities, but also the potential threats to some of those impacts, or contributors in a negative or positive way to the effectiveness or lack thereof of the impacts of the interventions that that are taking place as a result of our actions in that landscape. So impact and learning is a fifth element of what we call integrated landscape management approaches, which include several things, such as bringing people together to have an agreement of how to interact with that landscape, whether to conserve it or use it sustainably, or whatever it is that we're agreeing to do. There's a shared understanding amongst a group of people that may be operating in that landscape, that have a vision of how they want the landscape to look or develop, or to evolve over time. They take specific actions. They may have a landscape strategy, for example, and an action plan. If say we're talking about forest conservation, we're clear about in 10 years, 15 years, this is where we want to reach in terms of forest conservation in these particular boundaries of the landscape. And so continuous assessment of whatever we're doing, whether it's planting trees or removing invasives or doing assisted natural regeneration in that forest, we need to have periodic check-ins of whether we are reaching our targets. Are we making progress to reach our targets? It's normal M&E, right? But if we are doing this in a sort of confined, constrained boundaries without considering what happens outside of the boundaries, there could be a decision being made elsewhere by other actors elsewhere that you haven't considered as part of your landscape or as part of your stakeholder, who may be making decisions that may completely undo the investment that you're making. So taking this landscape approach allows you to, to continue to understand who is presenting threats or opportunities, or what is presenting threats or opportunities to the actions that we're taking in this particular landscape. And so it requires this iterative M&E and learning process that allows us to look beyond the boundaries. And I think CALI, as we will hear today, allows us to do this. And because it's specifically designed for landscape approaches, it will allow us to broaden our view on M&E and how we do M&E in order to ensure that when we design projects, we take this into consideration from the get-go. And it can help us with something as simple as identifying who the stakeholders are and going beyond who we consider a stakeholder if we're just looking at the sort of like constrained boundaries of the landscape. Who is outside that landscape? For example, those of you that are working on wildlife conservation, you'll be aware that for years and years, decades, we were thinking about protecting wildlife and species in the context of protected areas and assuming that this is fine. These are closed spaces where this wildlife is protected. But we've learned over the years that we need to take a landscape approach to doing this because the threats to wildlife inside protected areas, even if they are fenced, can come from elsewhere. And we therefore need to manage those threats from elsewhere, and also ensure that the flows of ecosystems, goods and ecosystems inside of protected areas also benefit those outside, especially just on the fringes of the protected areas. And this therefore requires sort of fit for purpose M&E tools and learning and impact assessment tools that can then allow us to design proper M&E systems and learning processes and approaches that broadens this approach to M&E. So yeah, I'll stop there and looking forward to hearing more about CALI. Thank you.
Thank you, Pema. That's great. So a broader geographical boundary, perhaps, as well as a greater number of areas of complexity coming in that need measuring. Well, the father of all of this, who's led the thinking on this alongside Andrew Vivarnik, is Andrea Bina. I'll hand over to him in a minute, but first of all, I'll just remind you that we are having a session of question and answers coming up later on in this launch program. So do contribute your questions to the Q&A box, which is one of the buttons along the bottom of your screen, just next door to the leave button. So don't press that, whatever you do. But the Q&A, if you want to ask your questions, we'll deal with those when we get to the end of our main presentations. So Andrea, over to you for details of how all this came together and what we're trying to achieve by rethinking M&E in this way.
Thank you so much, Simon, and thanks, Andrew and Femo for such a great framing. It's good to see so many colleagues also joining today and interested about learning more about this methodology that we carefully crafted and tested in several places and iterated through. I just wanted to start by connecting to and visualizing a bit what Pemo was sharing with us, which is about the complexity of dynamics that drive the deforestation at a landscape level. No? So this map is a map that we developed as part of CALI implementation in support of a project in Peru, of which James, that will follow me, will tell you a bit more about. And this map is showing how different drivers and the root causes of these different drivers are driving indeed deforestation in the landscape, and how, you know, there are different rounds of feedback loops between drivers and factors affecting all these drivers, different areas such as land governance, finance and markets, agricultural production, illegal activities, also the role of indigenous communities that we singled out in this map. And these are different areas that we can look at when we try to assess which are the drivers of deforestation and other related factors. So how do we make sense of all this complexity when we go about implementing landscape approaches? And if we can move to the next slide, we can see here, you know, the objectives that we set to achieve when we started to develop the CALI methodology, which are to help project teams make sense of and assess and make sense of the causality of project interventions, and how their project interventions interrelate with the system which is driving deforestation at landscape level. So as Andrew was saying, there is like a powerful relationship between the project interventions and the system which is driving deforestation. And often project teams are not equipped to continuously make sense of how these relationships play within the landscape, and how on one hand the system affects their project interventions, but also how the project interventions affect the system which is driving deforestation, and how, based on the sense that they can make from reviewing this interrelationship, how they can adapt their interventions on an ongoing basis, so that they can, you know, have a stronger impact in the landscape and higher likelihood to be successful. As the project teams go through this assessment, there are a number of other benefits that we provide through the CALI methodology, which are showing that, you know, what we say here, that the value really lies in the process, now beyond the results. It's a highly participatory approach, and it's led by the project team. So the project team gains an increased, a stronger ownership on their theory of change. They manage to have some time to really reflect and understand and unpack the logic of their project interventions, which is often something that, as Andrew was saying, you know, with project teams are recruited and they just get on board and start to implement the project without really getting the time to own their theory of change, to own their project interventions. And so this assessment really allows them to get in depth, unpacking the causality, the expected and realized causality of the project interventions as they go through implementation. It also allows for a great experiential learning experience, because the participants of this assessment, which will be, as we will see, the project team together with the stakeholders at the landscape level and beyond, these participants really manage to get a sense of that they're part of a system. So as they participate in the assessment, they strengthen like their system thinking skills, and they really get a better sense of like how they are embedded in this system, which is driving deforestation at landscape level. And also it manages to strengthen, as we go through the process, it also provides a good opportunity for stakeholders to get together to better understand what drives them, what are their interests, what are their visions at landscape level. And so this allows to somehow strengthen the relationships between the stakeholders and provide an opportunity for them to increase collaboration, which as we all know, is really important at landscape level, so that we can really achieve this results through an integrated landscape management approach. So how does it work? We have 5 steps. There's a preparation step, and just after that, the project team, together with the landscape stakeholders, start getting into this process that allows them to make sense of the system that's driving deforestation landscape level, and also how the the project interventions relate to this system. So first of all, they will work together with the stakeholders to develop a kind of like a shared system map, a shared visual map also of how the system is driving deforestation at landscape level. Then, together with the stakeholder, the project teams start to assess how the project interventions are addressing the drivers of deforestation at landscape level. And from there, they go backwards and start, looking at causality and assessing how whether the project interventions are well designed to address the key drivers of deforestation at landscape level, and also whether the single interventions are well designed, and whether the causality makes sense, whether the assumptions that were made at project design make sense, and what can be adjusted to improve effectiveness of their interventions. So this all ends with an adjustment of a refinement of the theory of change of the project, a refinement of the strategy and the interventions of the project, and of course also a refined results framework or any other tool that the project is using to manage their project interventions. In terms of concrete outputs, the methodology implementation results in an updated a new or an updated landscape system map, as the one that we were seeing before, which is a useful tool in itself for the project to have, and also as the main objective, the refined theory of change of the project, and also like a refined strategy and result for the project, and increased capacity of the project team to reflect and adapt and optimize the effectiveness of implementation. We have piloted the methodology already in 4 countries and 6 landscapes. This has been done in Peru, in Liberia, in Paraguay, and Indonesia. And we are about to write a case study of this last experience in Peru. So you will be able to access it on our webpage and read more in depth about what we did there. But also James after me will guide you through it. In terms of resources required for implementation, there are a few prerequisites that we identify in the methodology, and if they are not in place, the methodology also guides the project teams to make sure that these prerequisites are met. The first one is that they should have a clearly defined boundary for the landscape that they are working into and using as the basis of their assessment. There should be a stakeholder analysis, a view, more or less holistic view of other interventions in the landscape and how they relate together. And again, the methodology guides the project teams on developing this view, if not in place yet, and also like an adequate basic monitoring framework and system which is generating data about deforestation trends and dynamics and whether the outcomes of the project are being met. In terms of costs, this ranges between $20,000 and $40,000 for application, covering the time of consultants, workshop costs, travel costs, and also like some support if needed on our end. So we are going to be offering tailored support to apply the methodologies, through training, through tailoring it to the project context, and also on planning and oversight. And I will stop here. Over to you, Simon.
I was waiting to see if anything else would fill in that pause. Thank you, Andrea. That's great. So Andrea's given us a good run through there of how it's all proposed to work. And he mentioned on the map there that it's been tried out already in Peru, in Paraguay, Liberia, and Indonesia. So let's go now to James Leslie. He's Technical Advisor on Ecosystems and Climate Change for UNDP Peru, for some experience of how it actually works on the ground. James, tell us about that.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you, colleagues, for this invitation. In the case of Peru, CALI was applied in the context of a GEF-funded project titled Sustainable Productive Landscapes in the Peruvian Amazon. And it was applied at the midpoint of implementation of the project, which is important, and I will come back to that. The landscape where CALI was applied was specifically 2.2 million hectares where the project is implemented, and that represents about 2% of the Peruvian Amazon. However, it concentrates 20% historically of Peru's deforestation. So it's a highly complex, highly deforested and intervened landscape where we are working and where we then aim to apply this methodology. Now, first of all, this methodology really supported the team in enhancing systems thinking and integrating systems thinking into project implementation. And it also supported strengthening of the internal team coordination within the project. And how did it do that? Through the CALI methodology, it required that all of the different team members sat down together to analyze these interactions and these causal relationships, and particularly to be able to understand more clearly how the different project components and the outputs fit together. I also want to stress the participatory nature of this process supported by CALI. In the case of Peru, we engaged a diversity of stakeholders who are related to the landscape where we work: indigenous peoples and local communities, national and local government, private sector, those engaged across different supply chains, as well as NGOs and other actors in the landscape. And it fostered ownership of the theory of change and of these connections taking place in the dynamics within the landscape among these different stakeholders. And I would say that one of the strengths, before we move on to the next slide, going back still, one of the strengths of this exercise and of ensuring this level of participation was that it created a safe space for these different stakeholders to sit around the table and to analyze these dynamics within the landscape, and in particular to be able to discuss sensitive issues that oftentimes are challenging to bring up in discussions across these different stakeholder groups, whether that be related to corruption in the landscape, environmental crime. And this was particularly important for community leaders who felt that there was a safe space and a clear, systematic way to be able to address through this methodology of the project, because we engaged the different members of the steering committee in this exercise. And so they also acquired a greater ownership of the project strategy and of its theory of change. And it also opened up avenues for us to identify potentially new partnerships to address drivers of change that were not necessarily fully analyzed during project design. Now, as Andrea said, included among some of the outputs of this exercise, we were able to update our theory of change as well as the results framework for the project. And here it's important what Andrea mentioned of having a clearly defined landscape boundary upon which we could then analyze much more closely the dynamics. While we understand at a more granular level, at a larger scale, what's taking place within the country in terms of land use change, focusing specifically on landscape and understanding the weight of those different dynamics within the landscape was very important. The timing of the CALI exercise, as I said, it took place halfway into implementation of the project, but also it was post-COVID. So we had already undertaken an exercise as a team to review the theory of change early on in COVID, but this allowed us to reflect through a clearly defined methodology, be able to reflect how the pandemic had affected these dynamics and take them into account as we move forward in implementation. And finally, we were able to take into account and analyze and update our assumptions as well as risks that had evolved as a result of the pandemic as a result of shifts in government priorities and other supra landscape dynamics, whether they be related to the market, whether they be related to financial flows that also influence directly the dynamics of land use change within our landscape in Peru. Back over to you, Simon.
Thank you, James. Just before that slide disappears, you can see there on the whiteboard the physical version of a system map compared with the digital version, which we saw earlier on when Andrea started his section. And it really just remind me of what Pemo was talking about, the sheer complexity of what we're covering here. And the other point that James was making there about the midpoint being where you ask these questions before everything's settled down, or frankly, before it's too late, I guess, to make any changes in the way the project is running. So fascinating accounts from our panelists. So thank you all for that. Let's go into our questions and answers. The Q&A box is down at the bottom of the screen. So if you want to ask a question on the way the methodology works, the way it's implemented, then do click on that and come up with a question. One that occurred to me, which I guess might be one for Andrea and James to take first of all, is the effect on the practitioners who are actually doing this. If I'd been a long-term, this is something that occurred to me when I was reading through the guidebook, if I'd been in traditional M&E, if you know what I mean, and working that way for a long time, I'd be in this sort of plan, do, review cycle, and my bit would be in the review, and then other people go and do the other stuff. How do people react, and what's the experience in the 4 countries that we've tested it out in, to not having that sort of linear, circular approach any longer, but having to be more agile, having to do things maybe at a time when you're not quite sure everything's fallen in place? Andrea, do you want to take that one first?
I suppose it was to me. I think it's what we got from the implementation of CALI in the different countries and landscapes where we applied it, is that participants, and especially the project teams, have been really excited to engage with the methodology. It has allowed them to stop for a second and take the time to reflect on whether they were making progress, what was hindering them to make progress towards the goals, the ultimate intent that they had, which in this case was to reduce deforestation in their landscapes. And so I think, I mean, what we got is that they really welcome this exercise as a very participatory exercise together with the stakeholders, which is often not the case of what we managed to do through evaluations, which are led by externals and often don't have the time nor this methodology, honestly, to engage with in such a participatory discussion with the stakeholders. And systematic discussion with the stakeholders. So that's what we're getting in terms of immediate feedback. I was seeing another question in the chat, if I can take it up from Norma, which I think it's a great question. It's something that we are exploring. We recently engaged in another initiative on a related subject with the Gates Foundation on how do we do monitoring, evaluation, and learning in a more systemic way. And so we are exploring how we can generalize the methodology that we're using for projects that are aiming to address deforestation to other contexts. In principle, the methodology can be generalized and applied to any intent that a project may have, and not even necessarily a project. It could be like a cohort, yes, of different projects, of different initiatives that are interesting also to reflect together on whether, as an aggregate, they are making any progress at landscape level. And see also Pemo has her hand up, so I'll hand over to her.
Pemo, your comment.
Go ahead, Simon. Yes,
yeah, go ahead.
It's also a question. I guess part of the answer on whether this is applicable everywhere is that, yeah, landscapes, like we were saying, there are seascapes, there are waterscapes, you know, it's a defined social ecological system, whatever is happening within that system, we can call that a landscape. And the fact that the name landscape is in the name of the tool is actually useful in that context. But I have a question that probably applies to James. When you were applying this tool, was there a redefinition of who a stakeholder is at the midpoint when you were kind of assessing what's happening in the landscape? Did you have to, bring in new stakeholders, or at least become aware of new stakeholders? And, post the assessment or application of the tool, have those stakeholders been systematically brought into the project implementation as formal stakeholders, or were they just acknowledged? And if they have been brought in, how have they been brought in? And if not, how do you ensure that they, are aware of what's happening in your project site and align, I suppose, with your own vision and the strategy, or contribute to the strategy of your project? Over.
James, what's the answer to that?
Thank
Off you
you,
go.
Femo, for the question, and in fact it relates to Simon's first question as well. I think that one of the strengths of CALI is its participatory nature, and many of these projects that we're working on, the design is led by a group of consultants, a group that quote unquote has the knowledge and puts the design down on paper. And what CALI aims to do is to really open the floor up, open the analysis of the dynamics of the landscape up to a diversity of stakeholders, and really validate the voice and validate the knowledge that each of these stakeholders has about the landscape. And in doing so, as you say, Femo, we begin to identify perhaps stakeholders that were not engaged in the initial design of the project or in the initial strategies of the project. And I would say that in engaging them moving forward post-CALI, what CALI has allowed us to do is to strengthen partnerships and strengthen alignment and synergies with other efforts that are taking place outside necessarily of the project scope, but we recognize are just as important in order to address some of those underlying causal relationships that CALI has enabled us to be much more explicit about addressing. So we recognize our own limitations as a project, but then we are able to, through this explicit knowledge and understanding of the dynamics, we are able to reach out and generate new types of partnerships, new synergies with other actors, and also consider how we can mobilize, even through our work, new ways of working and new resources in order to address some of these drivers that perhaps the initial project was not in the capacity to do.
Thanks, James. Christopher Coslet writes to say congratulations to Andrew and the team on reaching this important milestone. Thanks, Christopher. He's curious to hear about the experience in the other countries mentioned. So Andrea, can you give us a quick pen picture of what happened in the other 3 countries?
Thanks, Simon. There are a lot of great questions popping up, and I think we can promise answers also via email afterwards, because we probably won't have a chance to take them all. To Chris, I think, so what we did was we piloted the first version of the tool in Indonesia, Liberia, and Paraguay. So that experience allowed us to refine the tool and improve it. So there was like a lot of good elements, also a number of things that we iterated further, and then piloted the final version in Peru together with James. So that is whether we got the greatest learnings on this last version of the methodology. which is what is most important to share. But we're probably considering also like doing some case studies also of experiences in Indonesia, Peru, and Paraguay, Indonesia, Paraguay, and Liberia, so we can share those ones as well. On other questions that are coming up, I wanted to single out the one which is asking whether CALI methodology will it recommend specific tools or means of reporting landscape progress. And this is not what CALI does. So there are like other tools such as landscape. Also, the ACL team is working on coming up with additional tools and guidelines on reporting on the state of sustainability at landscape level. What CALI does is that takes these data as inputs and then comes up with like a systematic process for project teams, which could be governments on the policymaking side. It could be development agencies, but also private sector companies and their sustainability strategies. It gives them a methodology to reflect on. So what does it mean? So based on this data that we're seeing at landscape level, and based on what we're trying to do, how do we make sense of whether like our interventions are contributing to making any sort of progress on specifically deforestation, but as I was saying, could be also other sustainability measures at landscape level. So what CALI does, it's really connecting the context with the project and allowing the project to take adaptive action based on the sense of their making of whether they are contributing to making progress or not at landscape level.
Can I focus you, Andrea, on a couple of questions about the timing, the right time to do these CALI interventions, and also a couple of questions from Adrian Barrett there, including how it might work with some of the GEF programs.
Yeah,
so
thanks, Simon.
On timing, when's the right time to do it?
On timing, what we recommend is to do an initial assessment when the project is about to start. We acknowledge that like many of these like many big projects, such as like some of the GEF funded projects and so on and so forth, are taking some time before the time where the project is approved and the time where it actually gets going with implementation. So what we recommend is to do an initial assessment when the project when the project team is on board and the project is about to kick off, so that the project team can start to familiarize and make any corrective action based on if the landscape has gone through any context level changes over the time that has gone between the time it was approved and the project was approved and the time the project is starting. It also allows them to it also allows the project team to take from the outset this system thinking perspective as they go on implementing their project. So this would be the first time to implement the methodology within a project lifecycle. And then another time could be after 2 to 3 years, depending on the length of the project. But like we recommended midway of project implementation. And then if it's an intervention such as the ones that we're trying to promote, which are like longer, which have a longer lifespan, then 3, 4, 5 years. So in that case, it could be applied regularly every 2 years, or even every year if a project is interested to continuously make sense of how the project interventions are contributing to reduce deforestation or not at landscape level and adapt. And in terms of applying it,
Pemo, you got your.
Yeah, I just wanted to compliment Andrea. I think because these days we actually have improved how we conduct stakeholder mapping and understanding of what's happening in a landscape within which we're designing a project. I think this tool can be useful for complementing that process and helping systematize it a bit and make it a bit more sophisticated, if you like, in the project design phase, at least for understanding what is happening in the landscape, who is in the landscape, what they might be doing that may impact or have a role in shaping our theory of change. I think it can be useful at that stage as well. But of course, as he says, resources are limited, time is limited during the design phase. So when resources become more available, it is indeed useful to reflect. But this reflection also, it can be, quite periodic. It doesn't have to be, once every whatever years. It can be an integral part of day-to-day implementation and monitoring of project interventions. But I think it might be useful as well to integrate more strongly into the design phase of projects, resources permitting, of course.
Excellent. Thanks for that contribution. It's time to move on now to our close. But first of all, I'll just alert you, if you haven't got the chat box open on your screen, we've just published there the CALI guide and a blog all about it. So you'll see if you go into your chats, the chat side of your screen, a couple of links there which will take you to the full publication and to a blog that we've written which summarizes it. So I'll hand over now to give his views on today's discussion and also on the guidebook itself to Alan Fox. Alan, of course, is Deputy Director of the Independent Evaluation Office of UNDP. Alan, over to you.
So thanks, Simon, and great to have this opportunity to engage with colleagues on an issue that I've been very pleased that Andrew and the team had me involved in, even at an early stage as they were beginning to think through this process and what CALI could put together. And it's an issue that I've been quite interested in over the years as being an evaluator, very much focused on the GEF programs, the UN RED program, and so a variety of work that UNDP has been doing on the environment. And I think it puts an interesting perspective on some of the key issues that were raised in this and some of the real value that I see in the CALI work. So first of all, we're always, as evaluators who are coming in at the last stage, we are taking a look at what is on the table. Was there a very strong baseline established? Has there been the use of adaptive management as the project has moved forward to see how they've taken into account some of the concerns that have cropped up? How they've involved the variety of different stakeholders and engaged with them in terms of the program, and of course how these tools have been used for an opportunity to continue to not only build on the project, but also to ensure sustainability of it. And I've been very impressed with what the team has been putting together in terms of the CALI effort. And I see it, and I know there was questions that were raised on this, I see it as an opportunity that goes beyond the deforestation activities, but actually can be quite well used in a variety of different activities, not only landscape-wide on our environmental work, but even the possibility of other development activities of UNDP. Some years ago, we did an impact study on the GEF and UNDP work on protected areas. And we took a look at the management effectiveness tracking tool that's used in that mechanism. And of course, it involves, or it suggests there should be an involvement of project proponents and stakeholders. And what we found is that wasn't always well carried out. What's really very useful in terms of the CALI work is that it puts that up front and says this is an opportunity to be able to engage directly with stakeholders to better understand what are the conceptual issues, what are the variety of different measures that are in place, what are the concerns that different stakeholders have, and actually to develop that in a systematic way, we think is quite useful. You know, the timing discussion that just came up is an interesting one, because from an evaluator's perspective, external evaluator's perspective, we'd like to see this type of an approach used at at the conception stage of the project, as well as an opportunity when there's a midterm review to be able to have this type of participatory approach. I think another point to it that we're finding quite interesting from from a systems perspective is that, you know, we are increasingly wanting to make the connection between the monitoring systems in place, the evaluative efforts that take place, and then what learning comes out of it. And I think CALI brings a really interesting way to be able to bring all three of those into a more coherent approach that we think is going to be very valuable. Now, the issue, of course, always comes up, can we afford it? And is it going to be done and actually carried through in a process that really builds on what this, what the kind of theory or conception has set out? And I'm actually quite taken by the successes that I hear in terms of Peru. And the work that was done there and what James was just able to indicate has been, I think, very useful. So we certainly look forward to seeing more on the case studies and how this work carries through. We look forward to the discussion with Andrew in terms of how we take this up in future evaluations from our office. But it really, I think, demonstrates a great effort on the part of the programming team to bring these linkages together. So let me, I know we have just a kind of a concluding time here and certainly want to leave whether Andrew or others have a final stage to it, but just wanted to give a few of those observations and suggest that we look forward to also seeing how this scales up so that we can take it into account in our oversight functions for the organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. That's great. A great summary from a real expert. Andrew, anything finally to add before we conclude? You're popped up on the screen there, ready to say anything. I've been very pleased with the range of things we've heard from our expert panel.
Yeah, no, thanks everyone. Great panel, and really excited by the level of participation. We had around 90 participants, a huge amount of very pertinent questions, all about applicability, causality, capacity building. And I think, you know, the takeaway message here is this really is a powerful, useful, innovative tool for all of us, and particularly project teams, to improve our understanding, awareness of the dynamics at the landscape level, the types of roles, contributions our projects can play, and how we can optimize those throughout the project, and not in static, staggered stages, but really giving the teams a new tool to equip them to really better think about what they're doing and how to make the most use of the budgets available in these projects. So great questions. I hope all of you do follow up with Andrea, and let's figure out how to start rolling out this tool across all of our projects. I really think it can make a difference in the decade ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. You'll see in the chat box, as well as the links to the blog and to the guidebook itself. So make sure you click on those before the Zoom conference ends. There's also a survey there. We'd like you to complete that to tell us how it went for you. You can learn more about the FACS community, which this webinar is all part of, by visiting the second link there in the chat. And we can also find more information by contacting Andrea or Bianca, and their emails will be on the invitation that came round. Thanks to all our panel, to Andrew, to Alan, to Andrea, to Pemo, to James, to Bianca, Philippe and Alexandra for organising all of the technology that's made this work. And chiefly, thank you to you, the audience, for taking part. I hope you've learned a lot, and we look forward to seeing CALI being used in all sorts of contexts in the future. Thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening.